Well, hello. This afternoon here in our studio, I have Ed Monk joining me. And Ed's coming back again to our conference with some more active topics. Goodness sakes. Ed, you've been our speaker for several days before, and now you're coming back again at conference. And you'll be here for more than a day or two at conference. You've got a lot of stuff to share with us. And so, one topic that I'd like to talk about is the active shooter problem here in America. Why on earth do we have such an active shooter problem here?
Well, why we have it, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, it's not going to get any better. I've studied this topic for 16 years, and before we've had two or three or four attacks in a relatively short time. But if you look back over the last 2 years, we've had 21 attacks in 22 months. So that's almost one a month for 2 years. So it's definitely getting worse as far as the numbers that we have. I speak about this topic nationwide, and the two main parts of the day long seminar on the active shooter that I'll be giving at your conference is first to understand the problem. That's the first part. And then, okay, what should we do about it? And what we should do about it is make the victim count lower. I don't come with a solution of how to end active shooter attacks. I don't know of anybody that claims to be able to do that. But I know for sure that we can make them less deadly and have fewer victims. I'm going to show the attendees at the conference that our country has been horribly failing at responding to this active shooter problem for over 4 decades. If the first active shooter ever happened yesterday, you could understand not being ready for it, not having a plan, because it's a brand new problem. But we've had multiple decades of knowing exactly what the active shooter is, and we just still refuse to do adult planning for it. One of the reasons we fail is we continue to rely on our country's 911 system to stop the active shooter, and that almost always results in a high victim count. So what I advocate is that schools and businesses and churches and other organizations stop relying on the 911 call to stop an active shooter if he comes to their location. I'm not saying don't call 911. I'm just saying don't rely on that phone call to stop the active shooter. The intended victims have to stop it. So what we'll do here at the conference, and since I have a whole day, we'll get to look at a lot of active shooter attacks. So we'll study probably in excess of 30 or 40 different attacks at varying locations. We'll look at attacks on schools, churches, colleges, businesses, open air locations, government buildings, military bases. And we'll look at what happens most of the time, therefore, what's most likely to happen in the future. We'll look at lessons learned, both good and bad, always trying to get at the answer of what gives us a lower victim count. So we'll try to look at what does help us get a low victim count and what does not. Once we understand the problem, then we'll look at options to respond to that problem. And we'll look at that from as both organizational responses to schools, churches, and businesses, but also individual responses. And we'll always be looking for the best response, and best is always measured by what gives us the lowest victim count. We'll end by looking at a very narrow slice of the American population, and that's the people at the conference. For those of us who go armed, very few Americans go armed every day. But for those of us who do, what are some considerations for us if we find ourselves in an active shooter attack and we want to get involved and try to stop it? So we'll look at things like mental preparation, training for this specific threat, optimizing our gear for this problem, look at tactics and engagement issues that we're likely to have to deal with, again, for this specific threat, not the mugger or other problems we could have outside the home, but specifically for the active shooter. So that's kind of what we'll flow through in that day, JB.
What a lot of information, and I'm happy to have you come and do that. And so I know that you've been able to make this presentation to many different audiences across our nation. And what is it that seems to surprise them most when they hear your information?
Well, I talk to broad audiences, just general public. I talk to cops. I train just, cop agencies. I train schools. I train churches. So I speak to a broad variety of people. And most of them are very surprised at what I tell them, because they hear about it all the time, because the media covers it all the time, but the media is not covering it from the point of view of how do we understand it and make it less bad. So probably the biggest thing is understanding that math and time is the most important thing about the active shooter attack if our goal is to lower the victim count. And what math and time clearly show us is the shooter is going to shoot a new victim every few seconds until either somebody stops him or he stops himself. And him stopping himself is usually not a good option because they don't usually do that until many minutes into the attack when they've got a high victim count. So, what I advocate is we as a country need to learn lesson number 2. Lesson number 1, supposedly, we learned at Columbine, which is we cannot wait on SWAT. No matter how well trained and equipped SWAT is, it just takes them too long to get to the attack. So that time and math, right? We learned that lesson in Columbine. What we now have to learn is not only can we not wait on SWAT, we can't even wait on the first responding police officer. Because yeah, it's going to take SWAT 30 or 40 minutes, maybe an hour to get there. That's too long. It's going to take the first cop anywhere from 4 to 15 minutes to get there. That's too long if we want a low victim count. So that's the first thing, is to look at time and math when we're looking at our responses. The next one is the armed citizen is by far the absolute best response to an active shooter. It's not the only way to stop an active shooter, but the armed citizen is by far the best way, because the armed citizen will be there when it starts. So we don't have to wait on a phone call and then a radio dispatch and then police travel and police entry. The intended victims that are there, if there's somebody armed, can stop it with a low victim count. And I show them that armed citizens have a perfect safety record. An armed citizen that has shot an active shooter and stopped an attack has never shot the wrong person by mistake. Never. But cops have multiple times. And they have a very good accuracy rate compared to law enforcement. And one of the most recent examples of that was the Greenwood Park Mall in Indianapolis, or in a suburb of Indianapolis, where a 22-year-old male citizen with no police or military experience or training at all, but was legally carrying his pistol, stopped the active shooter 15 seconds after it started. Now, he had a rifle and 4 magazines with him. He had more ammo in the bathroom where he came out of, but he had 4 magazines ready to go, and he only shot 5 people, and he only shot for 15 seconds because there happened to be an armed citizen present who was willing to act and did act. So it does not require military or police training. So that's one of the things you'll hear about. Well, we can't allow people in a church or the staff at a public school, we can't allow them to be armed because they have no police training. Well, shooting a gun is not a police specific task. Millions of hunters in America shoot guns every year. We shoot guns at targets. Armed citizens have to shoot home invaders and burglars all the time. So that's not a law enforcement specific thing. All the arguments against armed citizens, as far as it goes to stopping the active shooter, none of it is backed by data, and none of the other responses work as well. So having armed citizens to stop an active shooter is not a perfect solution, but the problem is there is no perfect solution. John Farnham always says we're not guaranteed a risk-free life. So it's not about finding a perfect solution. One doesn't exist. It's about finding the solution that has the lowest risk and the best odds of success. And that clearly is having somebody armed present. Another shocker is that the lockdown drills get people killed. Lockdown drills, which almost every school in America is using, work great 99.99% of the time, because 99.99% of days the active shooter doesn't show up. So schools love them because they're easy to type, they're easy to drill, and they don't make anybody uncomfortable. You turn out the light, you lock the door, everything's okay. But when the active shooter shows up and shoots through your doors and shoots through your walls and kills people like they did at Parkland and Uvalde, it doesn't work. And that hurts a lot of people's feelings, and it surprises a lot of people. Most of what we as a country are spending time, money, and effort on, supposedly to benefit us in the case of an active shooter attacks, just simply don't work. They're a waste of time, money, and effort. So trying to get the police there faster. Well, if the police get there in 6 minutes instead of 8 minutes, that might cause a lower victim count, but it won't be low. That'll just keep it at 30 instead of letting it get to 40. I want to talk about stopping it in the single digits. See-through backpacks, making your students wear see-through backpacks, panic buttons, better locks on the doors, security cameras, lockdown drills, all those things we're now spending time, money, and effort on aren't going to help. And that's why we continue to get high victim counts despite these efforts in these other areas. So those are the surprises usually when I talk to groups.
My goodness. And so will you be able to, with your presentation, come with some backups, some videos, and some other information photos and pictures?
Yeah, there will be a lot, and some of them will be graphic. There will be adult language. There will be live violence and videos. There will be photos and videos after the violence has taken place. There will be photos of great success and heroism, and there will be videos of failure, such as when a police officer drove around for 7 minutes after an active shooter call went out to avoid having to show up at the scene where the active shooter was. So we will talk about successes and we will talk about failures. But yeah, there'll be a lot of videos, audio, photos as part of the presentation.
My goodness, it sounds like we'd rate that R, not for restricted maybe, but for realistic. And so we'll get some realistic information. And we appreciate the hard work that you've done to be able to present this for us.
Well,
So,
appreciate the invitation to come to the conference and talk to your great attendees about this problem.
well, it came from the attendees because every time they see you, they want more of you. So we decided to get you back on our books. So, man, we're happy to have you coming. So thanks for joining me this afternoon and telling us a little about what we can expect. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the Law Conference this year.
All right, JB, I'll see you there.
You bet.
Understanding the law, when it's okay to shoot. I have lost count of the number of hours I have been in law classes. And even though it's called the same class, it's never the same.
Old School Gun School is a complete package. We're training in depth for the safe use of these firearms that we hope we never, ever have to use.
When I need to use it, when I don't need to use it, and what to do afterwards.
This information is essential, and you need to have this information to make good decisions.
The other thing that's really impacted me was how much JB talks about conflict avoidance, how to de-escalate a situation, when somebody's being aggressive, how do you bring them back down, how do you move away, get out of the situation. So it's not about escalating the conflict, it's about de-escalating the conflict, trying to avoid conflict as much as possible.
I'm more careful with how I handle my guns now. I also am more comfortable with handling the gun.